All right, so get ready because today we're diving deep into something, a concept that might just change how you see the world, even like the really basic stuff.
Hmm.
We're talking about how things last through time, which, believe me, gets a lot weirder than you'd think.
Yeah, it's one of those things you don't even, think about really until you start like picking at it.
Right.
And then you're like, hold on, how does the thing stay the same thing over time when, it's obviously changing?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah,
And that's where this idea of temporal parts comes in.
right.
So some philosophers think the answer is that things are like actually made up of these temporal parts.
Hmm.
Kind of like how you have spatial parts, like a head, arms, legs, and all that.
Yeah, think of it like a film reel.
Okay.
Each frame is like a snapshot of you at a certain moment, and then all those frames together, right, make up the whole movie of your life.
Yeah.
Per Durantis, the folks who really like temporal parts would say those frames, right, those are like your temporal parts.
Okay, so there's like a you yesterday and a you right now and a you tomorrow, all lined up to make the complete four-dimensional you,
Right.
which honestly kind of makes me feel like I should be like in a sci-fi movie or something.
Yeah, I think we all have our blockbuster moments, but
Yeah,
what's really interesting here is that this Per Durantist view, right, it kind of challenges that intuition we have that we exist as this complete whole at every moment. They're
Yeah.
saying, it's more like we're spread out across time,
Okay.
existing as these different parts at different times.
Okay, yeah, that's already making my brain do some gymnastics, but
Yeah.
I guess the big question is why would anyone think this, right?
Right.
What what problems does having temporal parts actually solve?
Well, one of the biggest puzzles they try to address is the problem of change.
Okay.
Like, how can that banana you bought on Monday, all green and firm, be the same banana that's now, like, sitting on your counter all brown and mushy?
Yeah, that's always bothered me. Like it's
Yeah.
still a banana, but it's like it shouldn't be able to be both green and brown.
Right.
Like pick a lane banana.
Exactly. And this is where temporal parts come in handy.
Yep.
Perdurantis would say that Monday's green banana is actually a different temporal part than today's brown banana.
Okay.
Each temporal part has its own properties, so there's no need for one part to be both green and brown at the same time.
So it's not that the whole banana changes, it's just that we're looking at different temporal slices of the banana,
Right.
and each slice has its own like distinct properties.
You got it. And this leads to a pretty interesting distinction between how Perdurantists and their rivals, the Endurantists, think about things.
Hmm.
Endurantists say you exist as a whole at every moment,
Okay.
fully present in each of those temporal snapshots.
So for Endurantis, there's only one you at any given time,
Mhm.
and that you is like the complete package, even if you're, changing over time.
Right.
Okay.
And this leads to some pretty, lively debates about how we even talk about temporal parts.
Hmm.
Per Durantis, they tend to talk about parts in a way that's not really dependent on time.
Okay.
So they would say, this banana has these temporal parts, period.
Okay, whereas Endurantis are all about the specific times. They say,
Mhm.
sure, the banana has different parts at different times, but that doesn't mean it's not a whole banana right now.
Right.
It's like they're speaking different philosophical languages.
Yeah, it really shows, how hard it is to communicate across those different perspectives. Like,
Right.
sometimes it feels like they're just talking past each other,
Yeah.
with different ideas about what it even means for something to have parts.
Yeah. Okay. I'm starting to see why this whole temporal parts thing is such a philosophical hot potato.
Hmm.
But I have to admit, a part of me is still wondering: is this just a fancy way of saying the same thing? Like, are we just kind of getting caught up on words here?
That's a fair question. Yeah, some philosophers would say that maybe there isn't a single right answer here,
Hmm.
and that both Perdurantism and Endurantism are just different ways of, describing the same reality.
So it's like looking at the same mountain from different angles. You get a
Uh.
different view, but it's still the same mountain.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Even if there's no clear winner, right, in this whole philosophical battle royale,
Yeah.
the act of thinking through these ideas, like, actually can change how you see the world. It
Yeah.
forces you to think about time and change and identity in this like whole new way.
I think you've hit on something important there. Like, even if we don't come out of this deep dive with like a definite answer, the journey itself is valuable.
Right.
It's like, exploring a new city.
Yeah.
You might not find that
Yeah.
perfect souvenir or whatever, but you're definitely going to have some amazing experiences along the way.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe those experiences will lead you to a totally new understanding of yourself and the world around you.
That's a good point.
So are you ready to dive into some specific examples of how this whole temporal parts idea actually plays out in philosophical debates?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, great. Let's talk about one of the most like mind-bending implications of temporal parts.
Oh,
This problem of coincidence.
coincidence. Like bumping into my old philosophy professor at the grocery store or something.
Not quite. No, this is about it's about two different things existing in the same place at the same time. You
Okay.
might think, well, that's impossible, but there are these classic thought experiments that really make you question that.
Okay. All right. You've got my attention.
Uh-huh.
Hit me with one of these thought experiments.
Okay, so imagine a statue, sculpted from a lump of clay. Both the statue and the lump, right? They occupy the same space.
Yeah, but one's art and the other's just, clay.
Exactly. They seem to have like different properties, different histories, right?
Right.
The lump existed before the artist even, got their hands on it.
Yeah.
But the statue, that only came into being once it was sculpted.
Right.
So are they one thing or two things?
Man, that's tricky.
Yeah.
I mean, my gut says there's just one object there,
Hmm.
but uh, it also feels like the statue and the lump, they have separate identities. Like I could destroy the statue by, smashing it or whatever,
Right.
but I wouldn't necessarily be destroying the lump of clay.
You've stumbled right onto like the heart of the puzzle.
Okay.
And the Perdurantists, with their temporal parts, they think they have a pretty neat solution. They would say the statue and the lump, they share temporal parts, kind of like conjoined twins might share a limb. So it's not that we've got like two totally separate things, but rather these overlapping four-dimensional entities.
Okay.
The statue is made up of, a subset of the temporal parts that belong to the lump.
So it's like nested timelines almost.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Okay.
And this overlapping picture, right, it explains why the statue and the lump seem both distinct. They have different temporal boundaries, different, lifespans,
Right.
but also connected because they share some of the same temporal, stuff.
Right. Okay. I'm starting to see how temporal parts can help here, but
Mhm.
of course our friends the Endurantists aren't going to just let the Perdurantists, have all the fun.
Of course not.
What do they say about this whole coincidence business?
Endurantists have their own like go-to move here.
Okay.
It's called the standard account of coincidences.
Okay.
And they say that constitution, what something's made of, is not the same as identity. So the lump of clay constitutes the statue, right? They're made of the same matter, but they're not identical.
It's kind of like saying, like, you're made up of cells,
Right.
but you're not identical to any single cell in your body.
That's the idea. The Endurantists would say the statue and the lump are distinct entities, even though they occupy the same space and are made of the same stuff.
Okay, but doesn't that seem a little too easy? Like, if we just keep multiplying objects every time something is made of something else,
Yeah.
wouldn't the world become like insanely crowded?
Right.
Like, are there infinite objects hidden inside my coffee cup right now?
That's one of the objections to the standard account.
Okay.
The worry about this explosion of objects.
Right.
And then there's the mass problem. If the statue and the lump are distinct, shouldn't their masses like add up?
Yeah, like if the lump weighs a pound
Right.
and the statue weighs a pound, should the combined thing weigh 2 pounds?
Right.
Something's not adding up here.
Yeah. And then there's maybe the toughest question of all, which is,
Yeah.
if the statue and the lump are made of the same matter, arranged in the same way at the same time, how can they possibly be different?
Right.
Shouldn't the arrangement of the parts be enough to determine the whole object?
Yeah, okay. Those are some serious challenges.
Mm-hmm.
How did the Endurantists defend themselves against this onslaught of objections?
Well, regarding the mass problem, they argue that we shouldn't expect the mass of coinciding objects to add up like that. It's not like your organs weigh a certain amount individually and then your total body weight is just the sum of those organ weights.
Right. So it's more about like the organization of the matter, the way it's put together, that determines the properties of the whole.
That's one way to think about it.
Okay.
And as for the how can they be different question, Endurnists say that constitution isn't like arbitrary, right?
Hmm.
There are certain conditions that have to be met for a lump of clay to become a statue.
Right.
And those conditions somehow, create a new entity, even though the matter itself hasn't changed.
Hmm. I don't know. I'm not sure I'm totally convinced by that. Like,
Yeah.
it still feels kind of mysterious how those conditions can, like, magically conjure a new object out of thin air, so to speak.
It's definitely one of the most debated parts of the standard account, yeah.
Right.
But if you're not sold on it, there are other options that endurantists can explore.
Okay.
Some suggest that maybe identity itself can be temporary.
Wait, so the statue and the lump could, like, become identical
Right.
once the statue is formed, even though they weren't identical before?
Right. It's a radical idea because, we usually think of identity as this fixed, unchangeable thing.
Right.
But some philosophers think it might be more fluid than we realize.
Whoa, that really throws a wrench into things.
Mhm.
So even though the statue and the lump, start out distinct, they could, like, merge into one entity at some point.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And it could even go the other way.
Hmm.
Maybe objects can be destroyed more easily than we think.
Hmm.
So when the artist creates the statue, maybe the original lump of clay ceases to exist and we're just left with a new statue-shaped lump.
Okay, my head is spinning a bit. Like,
Hmm.
it seems like we're getting into some really deep questions about, like, what it even means for something to exist.
That's philosophy for you.
Yeah.
Always pushing us to question our most basic assumptions.
Right.
And there's one more option we should mention, though. It's a bit more extreme.
Okay.
Some endurentists might say, you know what? Maybe there aren't really any statues or lumps of clay at all. There are just, particles arranged in certain ways.
It's like saying the word statue and lump are just, like, convenient labels we use
Right.
to describe these arrangements of particles, but they don't refer to actual, like, separate things.
That's the gist of it. Yeah, it definitely simplifies things. Hmm.
But I'm not sure it, quite captures how we actually experience the world. Like, I mean,
Right.
we talk about statues and lumps of clay as if they're real objects, not just, collections of particles.
Yeah, I think you're right. It feels like that view kind of throws the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've seen how temporal parts offer a solution to this temporary coincidence puzzle,
Right.
and we've explored some of the endurantists' responses,
Right.
which have their own strengths and weaknesses. But is this where the story ends, or are there like even more layers to this philosophical onion?
Oh, we've only just scratched the surface.
Okay.
What happens when the coincidence isn't temporary?
Hmm.
What about cases of permanent coincidence where two things seem to occupy, like, the same space and time throughout
Yeah.
their entire existence? Buckle up,
Oh.
because it's about to get even wilder. All right. Okay, so we've tackled temporal parts and we've wrestled with coincidence, but it sounds like there's even more to uncover
Yeah.
in this philosophical jungle.
Mhm.
What's next on the agenda?
Well, hold on to your hats because we're about to go into the really murky waters of vagueness
Okay.
and how it kind of messes up our neat theories about how things, stay around through time.
Vagueness, huh? I feel like I already deal with enough of that in everyday life.
Yeah, it's everywhere if you start to really notice it. Like,
Yeah.
when does a crumbling building stop being a building? Or
Mhm.
or if I, gradually swap out parts on my bicycle, at what point does it become a new bicycle?
Right.
These are the sorts of questions that make philosophers pour another cup of coffee.
Yeah, those are definitely head scratches. It's like trying to draw a line in the sand on a really windy day.
Right.
The boundary just keeps, like, shifting around.
Exactly. And that's the problem with vagueness. It makes those nice, crisp boundaries we love to use in philosophy all, fuzzy and uncertain.
Right.
But as you might expect, the preterantists think their trusty temporal parts can help us out here.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Mm.
How do temporal parts help us make sense of vagueness?
Well, they'd say that this indeterminacy, this uncertainty we're experiencing, it's because of a mismatch between our limited language and the precise reality of, four-dimensional objects.
Okay.
Remember those nested four-dimensional objects we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Well, preterantists think those are, all over the place.
So in the case of the crumbling building, there might be, like, a bunch of slightly different, overlapping four-dimensional objects,
Right.
each with a slightly different ending point in time.
Exactly. And our vague word building is trying to like capture all those subtly different objects
Right.
with one label, which, obviously gets messy. It's like we're trying to fit a bunch of weirdly shaped puzzle pieces into like one box.
So for Perdurantists, vagueness isn't a problem with the world itself.
Right.
It's more of a problem with how our language is trying to grasp that world.
That's the idea. But of course, the Endurantists, they have their own take on all this.
Right.
They may not try multiplying coincident objects as well.
Yeah.
But without temporal parts, it gets even trickier.
Yeah, if you've got like two completely separate three-dimensional objects just like totally overlapping,
Yeah.
it really, really stretches the imagination.
It definitely pushes the boundaries of our usual understanding of objects.
Yeah.
So some Endurantists might, they might just bite the bullet and say the world itself is vague. Like there just aren't any precise facts about when a building stops being a building.
But wouldn't that mean that identity, like whether something is the same thing over time, is also vague?
Right.
And how can that be possible when everything is identical to itself?
That's a big challenge for the world is vague camp.
Yeah.
Another option for Endurantists is to say that we actually speak precisely,
Okay.
but we just can't always know the exact boundaries of things.
So it's like there's a definite point when the building stops being a building, but we just don't have the information to like pinpoint it exactly.
Exactly. This view puts the vagueness in our knowledge, not in the world itself.
Mm.
And then, there's that radical option we mentioned before. Maybe there aren't any buildings at all, just particles arranged in a building-like way.
Right. That's a pretty bold move, just like dissolving the vagueness by dissolving the objects themselves.
Mhm.
But I still feel like it kind of misses something important about how we interact with the world.
Right.
We talk about buildings like they're real things, not just collections of particles.
Yeah, it definitely goes against our sort of common sense intuitions. So, as you can see, this whole vagueness thing, it just adds this whole other layer of complexity to the debate about how things last through time.
Yeah.
But there are a couple other concepts that Perdurantists often find appealing, and they make things even more interesting.
Hey, lay that on me.
All right, so one of their favorite ideas is universalism.
Okay.
This idea that any collection of objects, no matter how random, has a single object that they compose.
So there's an object composed of my left shoe, the Eiffel Tower, and grain of sand on Mars.
Yeah, it definitely leads to a pretty enormous ontology.
Yeah.
But Perdurantists are drawn to this idea for a few reasons.
Okay.
First, it helps to explain vagueness, right?
Hmm.
If there are all these overlapping building-like objects, it makes sense that our word building wouldn't just pick out one.
So it's not that the world is vague. It's just that our language is too limited
Right.
to describe all the precise objects that exist.
Right. Universalism also, it kind of fits with the idea that persistence through time might be partly a matter of convention. Maybe it's up to us to decide which four-dimensional object counts as the bicycle, right? Based on what we consider to be the essential features of a bicycle.
So there's like some wiggle room in how we carve up reality into objects.
That's one way to think about it.
Okay.
And finally, universalism avoids those really tricky borderline cases where it's not clear if a sum of parts even exists.
Right.
With universalism, everything has a sum, no exceptions.
It's definitely a clean and elegant solution, but I have a feeling there's a but coming.
You know me too well.
Yeah.
The but is that this whole universalism idea, it leads to this really surprising argument called the argument from vagueness.
Okay.
It suggests that even three-dimensional regions of space contain objects, which implies the existence of these instantaneous objects that look a lot like, temporal parts.
Wait, so the argument for universalism ends up like supporting the existence of temporal parts?
Yeah, it's this kind of philosophical boomerang. And to make things even more complicated, Perdurantists often combine universalism with another idea called Humean supervenience.
Okay, I'm all ears. What is Humean supervenience, and why do Perdurantists like it?
Okay, so Humean supervenience is this idea that all the facts about the world are are determined by the intrinsic properties of things at each moment.
Hmm.
It's like saying that if you could freeze frame the universe at any instant,
Okay.
you'd have all the information you need to know, everything about the past, present, and future.
That's pretty powerful idea.
Mm.
But how does it fit in with perdurantism?
Well, it creates a bit of a challenge for perdurantists when it comes to explaining motion.
Hmm.
If everything is determined by the instantaneous properties of things, how do we account for, an object's movement across time?
Yeah, it's like trying to understand a movie by just looking at one frame.
Right.
You lose all the information about the sequence of events.
Exactly. So this leads to a few different possible responses.
Okay.
Endurantists might say, see, this is why perdurantism is wrong. It can't even handle, you know, these basic facts about motion.
But what about the perdurantists? Surely they have a comeback.
They do, yeah. One option is to simply reject Humean supervenience
Like,
and just accept that there are some irreducible facts about the relationships between temporal parts.
okay.
Another option is to say that these seemingly problematic facts about motion, they're not really real facts,
Mhm.
but just artifacts of our limited perspective.
So it's kind of a philosophical stalemate.
Yeah, you could say that it really highlights those different assumptions and commitments behind these competing views. But before we wrap up our deep dive, there's one more big question we have to address.
Okay.
What about people?
Ah, yes. The elephant in the room.
Mhm.
Do we have temporal parts?
Yeah, it's a question that brings all this abstract talk about objects and change, down to this very personal level.
Right.
We care about our future selves, we feel connected to our past selves,
Mhm.
and we see ourselves as more than just a collection of, momentary snapshots.
So can perdurantism even account for what it means to be a person?
That's the million-dollar question.
Mhm.
Perdurantists might say it's the whole four-dimensional person acting through their parts, that makes choices
Okay.
and is responsible for their actions.
But doesn't that kind of bring up the coincidence issue again?
Hmm.
I mean, I seem to coincide with my body, but we don't have the same lifespan.
Right.
I could have been, born
Okay.
earlier or later, and I could outlive my body if say my consciousness was uploaded to a computer or something.
Yeah, you're hitting on one of the thorniest issues and the whole philosophy of personal identity.
Right.
And then there's that brain-splitting thought experiment.
Hmm.
If my brain is, divided and transplanted into two different bodies, would that create two of me? Does
Yeah.
that mean there were always two people there, just coincident?
Whoa, that's really pushing the limits of what I thought was even possible.
And don't forget about vagueness, right?
Right.
Our personalities and identities, they can change gradually over time. It makes it fuzzy when I begin and end.
Right. Yeah. All of this leads to a pretty fascinating and kind of unsettling possibility.
Mm,
The too many thinkers problem.
right.
If I have temporal parts, and universalism is true,
Yeah.
are there like countless person-like entities coexisting right now, each slightly different from the others?
Yeah, it's definitely a mind-boggling thought.
Okay, that's officially blown my mind, I think. I need a minute to process all this.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
From the basic idea of temporal parts to their implications for change, coincidence, vagueness, and even, the nature of personhood.
It's been a wild ride through some of the deepest and most challenging questions in all of philosophy.
Mm.
But even if I don't have all the answers, I definitely have this new appreciation for the complexity of something as seemingly simple as persistence through time.
That's the beauty of philosophy. It's
Right.
not always about, finding those definitive answers.
Yeah.
It's about expanding our understanding of ourselves and the universe.
Right.
And raising new questions that push us to think differently.
Well said. I think I'm going to need some time to digest all this,
Mm.
but I'm definitely leaving this deep dive with a whole new perspective on the world.
That's great to hear.
And who knows, maybe I'll finally start making sense of that ever-changing banana on my kitchen counter.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep those philosophical fires burning.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.